Okay, so here we're going to do y equals to 8. Now hopefully you remember this from the previous video because we did talk about these problems in the last video when we were finding graphing lines by finding any 2 points. When we have an equation like y equal to 8, this is always a horizontal line. Again, anytime we have y equal to some number, that is going to be a horizontal line at that number. So we know from our first question here whether it's horizontal or vertical. We know it's horizontal, so we can mark that. Now we have this question about slope. Now what I want you to think about, a horizontal line is a line that goes across this way like this. So if I want to go from this point to this point, and it doesn't really matter, I just want you to think about it. Remember that my slope is the up or down over right or left. Well, if I think about this, am I going to move up or down to go from this point to this one? I'm not, because I'm in line. I'm on the same level as that. So my top of my slope would be 0 because I'm not having to move up or down. And then let's say that I'm moving 5 here. Well, if I have 0 divided by 5, that's going to give me 0. So my slope here for a horizontal line is always 0. So again, the slope of a horizontal line is always 0. Now, the second part to this is asking us to graph this particular line. Again, we're graphing the line y equal to 8. You just have to pick 2 points that are on this line. Well, again, if we remember from the previous section, that's where we make our chart. We have x and y. But remember here, y is always going to be 8 no matter what. And now we can pick any number we want for our x value. So maybe we pick 0 and 3. So if we graph the point 0, 8, that would be not going left or right, but going up to 8. So there's 5, 6, 7, here we go, is 8. And then 3, 8 would be to the right 3 and up 8. Remember, if we graph this correctly, we would get a horizontal line at the value 8 on our y-axis. Okay, so for our next example, we're going to be looking at x equal to -7. Again, we've talked about x equal to a number before in our previous section. This is a vertical line. Okay, anytime I have x equal to some number without a y value present, this is always a vertical line. So I'm going to cross off vertical here. We know that that's our type of line we were looking at. Now again, let's talk about our slope, just like we did in our previous example. And if I have a vertical line, that's one straight up and down at some value on x. So let's say I want to go from this point to this point. Now you'll notice that if I'm counting down, let's say I'm counting down 3, I actually have a movement up or down. So my top of my slope would be -3. But when I count down 3, notice that I'm at my point, so I don't have to move right or left. So that would make the bottom of my slope 0. Now, hopefully you remember from when you were learning how to divide, we cannot actually do this. This is undefined. The idea with dividing by 0 is that, let's say I have $3 and I have no friends, then I'm trying to split $3 with nobody, and that doesn't make sense. So we can never actually divide by 0. So all vertical lines have a slope that is undefined. So again, vertical lines have an undefined slope, meaning they don't actually have a slope, again because you're having to divide by 0, which we're not allowed to do. Okay, but we can still graph this guy. For our second part of the graph, again, we're graphing x equal to -7, and we want to graph this by finding 2 points just like we did in our previous section. So we're going to say, well, this time our x value is never changing from -7. And our y can be anything we want it to be. Maybe it's 0 and 5. Again, the y value doesn't matter as long as our x is staying the same. We're just picking two values of y that are going to be along that x equal to -7 line. So for our first point, we're going to go to the left 7, and we're going to do a dot right there since we're finding -7, 0. For our second one, we're going to again go to the left 7, but this time we're going to go up 5. And there's our second point, and again, drawing our line straight up and down to get our vertical line, x equal to -7. So for our next set of problems, we are actually going to be finding the slope based off of 2 points. So we're not going to have a graph anymore. They're going to give us 2 points and we're going to tell them what the slope is. And that is what I have right here. This is the formula for a slope when given 2 points, x1 comma y1 and x2 comma y2. Notice that the top of your slope is always your y values. That's because your y values are the ones that move up and down, so the top of your slope is always going to be those y values. And then the bottom of your slope is your x values. Okay, notice also that we're using y2 first, so we're doing y2 minus y1, and then on the bottom we're using the x2 minus x1. You might see it where it's reversed, but one thing that will stay the truth is that if I use x2 or y2 first, then I have to use x2 first. It's very, very important that you do that. But this is our formula for a slope, so let's do a couple of examples on how to use the slope. So one thing I like to do whenever I'm trying to do an example where I'm using a formula, so in this case we're finding the slope between the points 0, 1 and 6, -3, is I always like to write the formula down because I do have to memorize this formula. So by writing it down every time I use it, it helps me memorize it. So remember our formula is m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. The other thing that I like to do when I'm using a formula like this is I actually like to label my values that I'm going to plug in. One of the reasons I do that is because I tend to make really silly mistakes when I plug numbers in, so this helps me prevent doing that. So this is going to be x1 and y1, and then this other point's going to be my x2 and y2. Okay? So now I just need to take those two values, or those four values, excuse me, and plug them into their appropriate spaces in my formula. So y2 is going to be -3 minus y1, which was 1. So I've got -3 minus 1 over, remember I got to use x2 first now, so I've got 6 minus x1, which is 0. Okay, so -3 minus 1, that means I owe you $3 and I borrow another one, so that would give me -4. And then 6 minus 0 would be 6. Now technically that's my slope. However, if you'll notice, I can reduce this, and I always want to make sure my fractions are in their most reduced format. So here we are going to divide top and bottom by 2 to get rid of that extra 2 that's in there. And our final answer would be -2 over 3. This is our slope between those 2 points. So again, I just want to find the slope between the points -3, -5, and 2, -8. I'm going to write my formula out so I don't forget it. So we've got y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Again, it's just my way of helping myself remember it for later on when I'm taking my tests. So this guy is going to be our x1, this guy is our y1, and then here we've got x2 and then y2. Just label in our points so we know what to plug in. Oops. So y2 is going to be -8. Now you need to be very careful with this next portion. We are subtracting, and then our y1 is -5. So make sure that you realize that. My formula itself is subtraction, and then my y value is a -5, so I have minus a -5 over x2 is the number 2. Again, notice that my formula is minus, and I'm plugging in a -3, so that's going to be 2 minus 3. A negative 3, excuse me. Now, one of the things that we need to do is we need to talk about these two negatives here. Remember, two negatives directly in a row like that are minus a negative as actually a positive. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just rewrite this real quick and say this is negative 8 plus 5 over 2 plus 3. And this will just make sure that when I do my arithmetic, I actually do the right math. So negative 8 plus 5 would give me negative 3. Again, that's I owe you $8. I pay you back 5, but I still owe you 3. And then 2 plus 3 would give us 5. We can't reduce that, so our answer for the slope here would be negative 3 over 5. Just again, make really sure that you're paying attention to the formula. It is subtraction, and then we are placing a negative number, and when we subtract a negative number, that is always going to turn to addition. Okay, so for our last problem, our type of problem that we have in this particular section is we are going to write our equation of a line. Now, to do that, I'm specifically going to use the point slope formula. And this is a little bit modified than what you would get in Hawks. I just think it makes it a little easier. This is also a little different than what you'll get in your homework because they're going to use a different formula. But this is the same one we're going to use in the next section. So I wanted to make sure we just had that consistency to it. Now, hopefully you'll notice that anytime we talk about slope, it is always the letter M. So that M right there is your slope. This x1, y1, that is your point that you're going to have your line going through. So x1, y1. And if we have these two particular pieces of information, we can find the equation of any line. So let's say, for instance, so for our number 8 here, we have this being our point, and we have this being our slope. So we have all the information that we need in order to find this equation. So again, I'm going to write my formula down just so I can help myself remember it. So y equals m times x minus x1 plus y1. So when I'm looking at this, remember labeling my values, I've already got my m labeled. I know that that's negative 3. This 0 is your x1, and this negative 5 is your y1. So we're just going to plug that information in. So we're not going to mess with our plain old y's and x's. We're only going to plug into the x1 and the y1 and the m. So we've got y equals negative 3 times x minus 0 plus a negative 5. Again, making sure, looking at my formula, remember my formula is addition, and then I'm plugging in a negative 5. Now, I need to solve this and make this a little bit prettier. So what we're going to do is distribute our negative 3. So we get y equals negative 3x. Well, negative 3 times a negative 0, that's just going to give me plus 0. And the other thing I'm going to do is right here, when I add a negative, that's the same thing as subtracting. So that would be minus 5. Well, now I can take these two guys, since those are both numbers, and I can add those together, and my equation would be y equals negative 3x minus 5. This is my answer that I'm looking for my step 1. Now, notice step 2 is actually asking us to finish graphing this problem. It's already graphed the y-intercept. Remember, our slope was negative 3. Well, it's negative 3 over 1. So again, since that's negative, we're going to go down 3 and to the right 1 since that bottom is positive. So starting at our y-intercept, which is already marked on our graph, we're going to go down 3 and to the right 1. Now notice that I can't go down 3 more, so I can't get that other point that I like having. But remember, you can always do the opposite movement. So the opposite movement would be to go up 3 and to the left 1. So starting back at my y-intercept, I can count up 3, 1, 2, 3, and to the left 1. And I can draw my line nice and straight between those 3 points.